the greatest thing that I did when making Way Down, and I discussed this with my DP um, uh, early on, was that we had an approach going into making the entire film, and that approach was we want to make everything super easy for us and super simple, so that by the time everything came together, they would kind of stack on top of one each other and then look super complex, look super hard, as if we put a lot of effort. I mean, yeah, we did put a lot of effort into it, but ultimately, the idea was that none of us had ever made a feature film before, so we wanted to make it as easy for us an entry point as possible, and by making everything super simple, we'd make it would look super difficult, and we would look smart. And so we're kind of lazy, we're kind of inexperienced, and that's what we kind of ended up doing. And because of that, it kind of worked in our favor. So here are the couple things that we did that made it super simple. One of the things was obviously a small cast. Cast was max 5. So we had the 2 primary characters. Then we had a third kind of like character that was part of the problem, the issue at hand. And then we had 2 other characters that kind of like spoke to the main 2 in terms of like things that they wanted, and it helped kind of reveal some of that. And besides that, everybody else was irrelevant, and we kept it small, contained. And then, okay, so we can't have explosions, we can't have, so what are we going to do? We'll do music. Great. Cool. So to make it easier for us, what we decided to do is that each song would only happen if the characters got to an emotional kind of checkpoint. And so anytime there was a moment of kind of like emotional revelation, perfect point for the music. So instead of forcing songs to kind of go on at other points, it was like, okay, so whenever there's an emotional breakthrough with these characters, specifically Carlo, that's when we would have a song go on. And I think it worked. It definitely worked, especially the last 2 songs. The last 2 songs really helped. One of the things to talk about too is that to make it easier on us, not easier. I use this term really loosely, but we wanted a really emotionally hitting song for the second to last one. And one of the things that we did was that instead of trying to craft something, we decided to let the actors do it themselves. One, it relieves a lot of pressure off of us to make the songs. But, there was a lot of discussion and a lot of theory that we kind of talked about in terms of, like, what does the song mean? Why is it important? What is the goal of it? Sure, yeah, there's a lot of that. But it made it easier because then it just made it, it entirely relied on their instincts. And what we got was very wonderful. Another thing, too, that we tried to do to make it as simple as possible for us is we tried to cut down the amount of cuts in the entire film. So rather than overusing cuts, we tried to scale back and use the least amount of cuts as we could. It being our first feature film. So if you watch the film, there's a lot longer takes when it comes to dialogue. So we hear people talk off screen. We stay on people's faces for a long period of time. We specifically with the songs, when we filmed that, we kind of filmed it usually one take to do the entire song because we wanted to bring authenticity for it, right? Two, we wanted to make sure that when the camera work was happening for each of the songs, it was like emotionally investing in the emotions of the song, rather than treating it as like, oh, hey, everybody, a song's going on. So one example would be the first song that Carlos sings when they jam together for the first time. in that song, it's pretty much just on Carlo for 90% of the time. And the smallest technique that we did was just slow pan in as he becomes more invested into it, just kind of to speak to like, oh, he's actually revealing something about himself. And that works a lot better than boom, 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 boom. First of all, we don't have to worry about editing in it. Second of all, we don't have to. We only look at what's important, and what's important is how it's affecting him. And then we don't have to worry about overdubbing. So all the songs in the film were recorded live. They were recorded on set rather than recorded in a separate studio or recorded elsewhere and then brought in and played over it, and they played with it. We did not do that. We wanted it live. And again, it saved us time for recording these songs. It saved us time editing. It saved us time finding someone to engineer the songs through the audio equipment. And ultimately, it let us bring more authenticity to those songs and those moments. So I was really happy with that. And also because it relieved so much pressure off of that. And so it was easier for us to do that. It became so much simpler. But when people see it, they're like, wow, that's really cool. And that's the trick. We're really lazy, but we want to make it look as if it were difficult. And that's all we do is scale it down to these little things. So ultimately all the cuts and all the songs and all the decisions were made because it was too hard for us, so we wanted to make it simpler. But that being said, it was still hard for us. Just because you have less cuts doesn't mean you can half-ass it. Now you have to think about, okay, with less cuts, how specifically are the camera movements or the placement within the camera framing going to be used to justify having less cuts? We got to treat like inner shots like cuts, essentially. The strategy can't just be point and shoot, not anymore. Now it's like we have to come up with a reason for having the camera look in the directions that it was. And the simplest way to look at it was like, okay, if there was a person standing in the room, how would the camera move if they were the eyes of a guy? They'd stand up, they'd walk down, they'd kind of look around, all that stuff. And we kind of use that to justify the camera movements and the little bit of longer takes or having someone off screen speak dialogue. Since then, my understanding of how to do that has been a bit more refined and a bit more clear now. But I think it was a great first try because from not understanding how to do that and just like, God, we're so lazy. How can we make this less hard on us? I think it was not bad. I'm kind of hard on myself, especially when it comes to like, I could have done this better, could have done that better. But in general, it's like, it's not bad for the first time. Hopefully the second time with Silhouette will be a bit more successful in terms of like how everything's done in a simple way, but still make it look complex. But either way, that's how I feel. Because in improv, what we do use a lot of is themes. And the thing is, we don't know what the theme is usually when we start. The only way we know how to do it is through repetition within the show. So when we improvise a couple of scenes, we start to notice some patterns, and then we just kind of repeat those patterns a little bit. And then by the time we finally understand it, it's usually at the end. And then at the end is when we bring back those patterns together for like the actual last intention. That's when we look like geniuses. That's when we look like, oh my God, they were so in sync the entire time. Nah, we were literally just figuring out as we went, and then we were just like, is this it? Is this it? And then that's when it kind of comes together, which is exactly what I'm doing with my filmmaking. I have no idea how these things are fitting together, so I'm making it a lot more simple, so that by the time we get to the end, it kind of has these multiple layers of things that make it seem more complex and more hard than it is. So then we look real smart, but who's to say? I don't know. But either way, I think that's a good way to approach it. Approaching like, how can I make it easier on me? But don't approach that approach in a lazy approach. So many approaches. That's that was one way that we looked at filmmaking for Way Down, and now we're trying to. Now I'm doing it in a more refined way for Silhouette, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, yeah, that's it for now.